Hello, everyone. Hello, Market Research Council members and friends. I am Kim Frank, current MRC president. Thanks so much for joining us today. Today's event is going to be on the 4A's Reset Digital Universe Inclusion Initiative. Immediately following today's session, there will be a networking event. In order to access this event, you're going to need to leave this Zoom link at the end of this Zoom and access the one sent to you specifically for the networking event. If you have any trouble, please send a note directly to today's panelists, and we'll try to sort that out while the panelists are speaking. Before we jump into the main session, I do have to say a heartfelt thank you to today's sponsor, Reach3 Insights. Today we have Matt Kleinschmidt. He is the founder and CEO of Reach3 Insights. Matt, thank you. Our sincerest gratitude for your generous sponsorship. Matt is going to take just about 5 minutes of our time today to share a bit about Reach3's approach, some of his insights, and talk a little bit about leveraging mobile messaging-based techniques to increase diversity in research prior to our main session. So Matt, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'll share my screen here real quick. All right. Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday to you all. I'm Matt Kleinschmidt, founder and CEO of Reach3 Insights. For those of you who maybe haven't heard of us, you're not alone. We're a relatively new organization. We launched about 3 years ago. I'm a research veteran. I'm involved in this with a few really cool colleagues who some of you may have met before. We launched this venture in 2018 with my partner Eileen Campbell, the former global CEO of Millward Brown, and also Andrew Reed, who was the founder of a research company called Vision Critical. We launched two businesses, Rival Technologies and Reach3 Insights, under the name The Rival Group. And what we really are trying to do is to really reimagine the insight experience from the ground up. And a key part of this is to really address some of the inclusion issues that are facing our industry. So we'll get into a little bit more of our approach in just a couple of minutes, but this is something that as insight professionals, inclusion in research, quite honestly, is reaching a boiling point. Over the last couple of years, with polling results and a lot of private commercial clients and some of the perceptions that really the research approaches today that are being used are really missing the mark. Not a week goes by that you don't see another article that's sort of disparaging to sort of the research industry about some of the techniques and approaches. As a lifelong insight professional, I take that very personally, and we're starting to see the impact of this this lack of inclusion on a lot of brands and how people view brands and how people view retailers, et cetera. We did a study earlier this year where we looked at diversity and inclusion in advertising, and you can see some of the results here. And I'll show a little bit more of this in just a bit. Clearly, advertisers are not really hitting the mark on inclusion and diversity. And as an industry, we need to do better. So when you think about the insight space, what can we do about it? There's a few guiding principles that we use when we launched Rival and Reach3 a few years ago. And I would like to just deep dive into a couple of those today. So there's sort of 5 concepts that I would ask everyone here to sort of consider. Examining your sample sources and recruitment tactics. This is a really critical piece, and I'm going to dive into that in just a bit. Think about the channels of engagement. How you're actually capturing the data is a really important element, and I'm going to come back to that in just a sec. Examining the tone and tenor and context of the activities you're deploying. What is the language you're using? How does that come across to the end participant? Letting those participants express themselves in a way that feels natural. And then finally, as an industry, we need to do better at increasing diversity in our own ranks. So at Reach3, there's 3 components in terms of how we do research, how we're building our company from the ground up, that really are getting at a much more inclusive method of capturing and gathering insights. Number 1, we are building our company around the concept of mobile messaging-based approaches, engaging with people on their own terms. So over on the right-hand side, you can see a little demo of, our exercises, similar to what you might think of as a survey, but we call them chats or conversational exercises. And our research platform mimics the look and feel of a mobile messaging-based environment. This is a huge thing. It helps to bring the guard down on people, let them share their stream of consciousness feedback, and really gets them in the mode not of taking a test, but of communicating. And that's something that's really important. Another thing that's really important about this approach is that it's quite interesting when you think about what I call the elephant in the room with regard to research. And that is that, the majority of quantitative research that's done today is still entirely reliant upon email. And so our mobile messaging based approach gets around that. It expands our audiences. It allows us to engage with underrepresented groups, obviously allows us to engage with people who are younger. And another key benefit of this is we're able to engage with people in the moment while they're out and about in the world. And not just contacting them once, but re-engaging over and over and over again. And this is a really important aspect of increasing representation and inclusion in research. Secondly, from a sampling perspective, we like to talk about, moving beyond the panel. There's a number of things that you can do to expand your sample frame to be more diverse and inclusion in your approaches. So there's a few things noted here on the slide before you. We sample regularly off of social media. We also are doing some very cool things with, product trials and bringing new voices into the boardroom through QR codes. So, getting those non-panelists, the people that are, the regular people out and about in the world, being able to, in this case, you're using a QR code on a product that's being released, where someone just simply puts their phone up, scans it, and they're brought directly into one of our conversational exercises. It's a great way to bring new people in from a sampling perspective. On the right-hand side, we also do a lot of sampling right off of branded social media sites as well as influencers. And you can see on the right-hand side here how this works. This is a program that we're doing with Revolt, P. Diddy's network there, and it's on his social property. You simply swipe up on his Instagram feed and you go directly into one of our conversational exercises. This is a great way to bring those new voices into the research process, and we're doing that in a wide variety of applications right now. Third, and finally, the use of video. Now, this is something that, our platform has video embedded in, so you can do really robust quantitative sampling, very nice contextual qualitative approaches, and video is part of the entire process. And you can see here how we're doing this for a number of our clients.
At this point, who wants to vote if we have both people that we're...
This is some work we did for Revolt around the election. Also doing some work with OWN on programming and content.
Storyline, amazing. They would say, no, you shouldn't.
And finally, on the right-hand side, you can see.
Trying to tell me that I am not a woman because I play games.
This is some work we did recently for Lenovo, examining female gaming habits and behaviors, and some of, frankly, some of the things that they experience gaming because of their gender. And all these approaches were done through this unique mobile messaging based approach. It helps to illuminate, build empathy for underrepresented groups. So that's all the time I have for today, everybody. But we've done a lot of work in this space. On the right-hand side, we have a study we did not too long ago about diversity, inclusion, and perceptions in advertising. I'd be happy to share that with you. If you scan the QR code on the screen, you get a little bit more information about our organization. If you want to email me directly, I'd be happy to share some of the research that we've done on this. I would like to just leave you with this one final video that is, I thought, pretty important from this study that we did on white privilege and diversity, inclusion, and advertising. So I'll just play that and then I'll be done.
To me, it's important to have diversity in ads, commercials, is because as a woman of color, I want to see myself represented as part of society. And when people of color or someone that looks like me is not represented in ads, commercials, simple things like that, travel ads, it looks like we're completely excluded out of the equation. It also makes us feel like we're forgotten.
So you can see the power of video here, which is something that is really important for bringing these unheard voices into the boardroom. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and stop my share. I appreciate the opportunity to take a bit of your time today. I hope everyone has a great Friday and a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was really great stuff. Loved seeing that. And again, thank you so much for sponsoring today's event for the MRC. If you haven't done so, now's a great time to send in your dues payment for the year. Just a quick reminder on that. And then without further ado, I'm going to introduce someone who needs no introduction, our very own Bill Harvey, who is going to be moderating our session today. So the floor is yours, Bill.
Hey, everybody. You'll see my face in a little while, but first we're going to look at a few introductory slides to kind of put a frame around what the Universal Inclusion Project is all about and where it came from. We're going to cover the objectives. We're going to look at population changes, how advertising has sought to reach diverse audiences and speak to them, the research and the activation approaches that we're going to use in this initiative, and then some early findings related to altruism in advertising. And then the panel will discuss the project, and then we'll bring the audience in and we can all discuss it. What we'd like to do is to learn at a deep level how each population segment wants to be portrayed. And we want to learn by testing new ads what the sales and branding effects are of what we call empathetic ads, ads which consider the motivations, the culture, the self-identity of the people that we're speaking to. And since we're talking about sensitive subjects such as race and so on, we suspect, don't yet know, that the context in which the ad appears, which is always important, is probably even more important in using these kinds of empathetic ads. We also want to test non-ad ads in linear TV, and I'll be showing you an example of what we mean by that, branded content in linear. The people who are participating, and so far I won't steal any of Charles's thunder because I know he's going to be telling us about some of the companies that have already joined publicly. You've perhaps read about it, and you've seen some of these names. They will be getting the deepest learning and the maximum benefit out of this. We hope you in the room, the leaders of market research, will help bring in your companies, the companies that you work for, the advertisers and the other companies that you work for into the project so we can all work together. And the industry will be benefiting by some top-line empirical generalizations in which you'll get a sample of a couple of those right here in these next few slides. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is to change advertising in a way that makes everyone happier with it, makes it a better consumer experience, as Mark Pritchard has been continuously reminding us is crucially important, and at the same time makes advertising more effective with everyone. And beyond the financial benefits of more successful advertising, what we're trying to do here is have a social effect, a pro-social effect. Advertising is a very powerful force. Right now, disunity in the world is rampant. I don't think I have to underscore that point to anyone. And if advertising can do anything to try to bring us all closer together, that would be a darn good thing. So the 2020 census, of course, carried out under the most difficult conditions perhaps the census has ever faced, was a huge success. And one of the things that it taught us is that the population is shifting faster than we had expected. Forecasts before the 2020 census had expected that the white majority would become a minority, below 50% of the population by around mid-century. Now it looks like it's going to happen much sooner. We actually have passed 60% for the first time. The white population is below 60% for the first time in US history. Part of this, of course, is due to the growth of the right-hand column there, people of color, which are not the only diverse populations. You know, there's also people who are not heterosexual. There are also women and old people and other people who are not necessarily being spoken to properly, portrayed the way they'd like to be portrayed. But you can see here, not only are the main sources of growth in the US population, not the white population, but in the last 4 years, the white population has actually been declining. So that kind of speeds things up, and I don't think anyone was forecasting that. So these are some of the reasons why we have to learn to speak to these populations. It's become more urgent. Now, advertising has tried to do this in the past, particularly in the last 10 years. And the main way of doing it has been to show the faces that aren't white, to show the people that we're talking about here. But the way we've done it has often backfired. Brands had to yank ads, in some cases within 24 hours. And some very, very big brands took branding hits, which could be long lasting and take a while to change. So this is part of why this initiative is so important. So how are we going to go about addressing this in a way that's different from before? Well, Reset Digital has a collection of techniques that are fairly or possibly even greatly unique. One of them being RMT, which you've heard about. You've heard me speak about Bill McKenna and my work on life motivations and ad context resonance and ad person resonance. But you can see there's more to neuroprogrammatic than that. And if you look at the bottom of the slide, you see the single most important core factor in actually having success in universal inclusion. And that is stimulating the creative teams, giving them a depth of insight that they didn't have before, and working with them to do two things. And this, I'm going to quote Mark Truss of Wunderman Thompson. What he said was, creative people hate prescriptive advice, but they desperately want guardrails. So we're going to take that to heart, and we're going to do what Mark suggests. We're not going to be prescriptive, but we're going to try to stimulate and bring out their own ideas. We'll all be working together very closely on that between researchers and marketers and the rest of us. Next slide, please. So again, to summarize the approaches, we're going to study altruistic ads. Why altruistic ads? You'll see a little bit more about the why in a moment. We'll be discussing insights with creative and helping them to develop new creative, which we'll then be testing. A lot of what we'll be doing will be random control experiments, often done programmatically. We'll work in all media, whatever the advertiser and agency want us to do. We'll be using context and audience ad empathy. RMT will come in there. We'll be doing cross-platform measurement using the measurement companies that the specific advertiser and agency want to use. And we'll be guided by client-specified research and activation throughout. So there's actually a plan. It includes milestones. We're getting started right now. We hope to identify the brands that are actually going to be involved before the end of this month. That process has begun. By October, we hope to have a list of the brands and the campaigns and the schedule and a start at beginning to plan the creative and the media. Moving on to the next slide. Now, before I launch into this, which is 4 slides about altruistic commercials, I had promised that there were going to be 2 empirical generalizations that we were going to suggest in these few minutes of slides. The first one I should have mentioned a moment ago when we were talking about the failures of ads aimed at diverse audiences. Often those failures were involved with humor, ads that were trying to be funny about a serious subject. That's something to be cautious about. We know enough to use that as one of the guardrails to begin with. Now, the altruistic commercials came up slightly before we started universal inclusion. This was the ARF asking RMT, actually it was the ARF Cognition Council, of which I'm a member, asking RMT to see within our database, could we find the most altruistic commercials? This was related to COVID and the fact that so many commercials coming out during COVID were related to the idea of altruism, something bigger than oneself, self-transcendence, as RMT calls it. So let me share with you what we found. Next slide, please. This is not an ad, but a piece of branded content that runs in ad pods on television. Excuse me. And also, of course, on CTV. Why don't we play the ad first, and then we'll talk more about the findings.
Who said that?
The lady at the store.
That is not a compliment.
It's an ugly, nasty word, and you are going to hear it. Nothing I can do about that. But you are not going to let that word hurt you.
You got your ID? Guess I stopped you.
Now, when you get pulled over,
I'm a good driver. Okay?
baby,
Don't worry.
this is not about you getting a ticket. This is about you not coming home.
I'm gonna be okay. Right? Okay.
You are not pretty for a black girl. You are beautiful, period. Okay? Don't ever forget that.
One of my favorite ads of all time, non-ad ads of all time. You could think of these as mini programs or as branded content. And of course, they're being used. Branded content is not brand new in digital, but it's been underused in linear TV. And we think that that may change as a result of universal inclusion. This particular mini program scored very high on RMT's measures of self-transcendence, AKA altruism, as well as self-knowledge, creativity, heroism, love, and aspiration. And you can see over on the right that that's about half of all of the 15 motivations that we've found in the population as a whole. If you go to the next slide, what you see is these are the top 10 shows on television for that particular mini program, The Talk. If you put The Talk on these shows, you'll get the greatest degree of resonance. There'll be the least dissonance when the ad comes on in the middle of the show. It will have much more effect as compared, for example, putting something as sensitive as The Talk into a cynical show. I don't know if you remember Martin Scorsese's short-lived HBO show called Vinyl. the talk placed in the middle of vinyl. Of course, HBO didn't have this problem, not carrying advertising. But any kind of a cynical show would make it a very weird experience to go through the talk, and it wouldn't have the desired effect, which is why some of us believe that context may be even more important when we're talking about the new advertising we're trying to create here. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at here is an analysis of 433 ads, all of the ads that had been in the RMT database as of a few months ago. And what we're seeing here are the comparison of the top 10 most altruistic ads as compared to the norm for all 433 ads. And what you see is that on all 15 motivations, these ads are above average. And altruism is not the motivation that has the highest score. The motivation that has the highest score is actually love. And what does this mean? What it means is that when you do advertising that's altruistic, you get the automatic benefit of you're appealing to everyone who has any motivation at all, any known human motivation. The same spot, as long as it's aligned with altruism, is going to appeal to everyone. It's an important empirical generalization. Next slide, please. So that's it for the slides. And I'd like to ask the panelists to turn on their cameras and their microphones now. And the host has asked you to start my video. Okay, there we are. Now we're all on.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome, panel. I'd like to ask the three of you to take a minute each to give us a little bit about your backgrounds, and then I've got some questions I'd like to ask. And we've nominated Yin to go first, Charles to go second, and Ashwini to be the anchor on that.
Great. Thank you, Bill, and thank you to MRC for hosting us today, and our sponsor, of course. So my name is Woodrani. I'm currently the CEO of Milk Pep, which is probably best known for the Got Milk commercials that ran for many, many years and that we reintroduced. Prior to that, I was the Chief Consumer Experience Officer at Campbell Soup Company. And before that, I have a longish career at New York-based media and creative agencies. I was raised in Singapore, but I've been in America for a long time.
Charles Cantu, CEO and founder of Reset Digital, serial entrepreneur inside of and outside of large corporations like Disney and Comcast. Left Ampersand to work at a startup called Media Math, and everyone thought I was crazy, which I was. And I got crazier. I started a trading desk and an SSP, Huddled Masses and Colossus, with their funding, and sold those 3 years ago. And I'm back at it again. So we're pretty excited about what we're talking about here today, and very ethnically diverse, if we're going to talk about that. I was raised by a Mexican father, a white mom, and I happen to be Black, if you haven't noticed.
I'll go last. I'm Ashwini Karandikar. I want to thank MRC for hosting this very important session and important topic. Bill, I think you did a fabulous job with the introduction. That video really, every time I see it, I choke because no parent should have to have that conversation with their child ever. Speaking about myself, I am the practice lead for media, data, and technology at the Forays right now. Before this, I was at McKinsey, and prior to that, I started and ran Amnet, which was Census programmatic group across 50 plus countries. I also serve on a few boards, including Media Math IOTA and MIQ. I'm very active in music, art, and theater, and that's where I get my soul filling connection with community overall. And I love the topic, Bill, that you mentioned about how creative can actually bring out the best in people in terms of emotions, etc. So I'm very glad we're talking about all of this.
Well, thank you. So I'll begin my questioning with Charles. Charles, why did you and Reset and the 4As decide to take on universal inclusion?
Yeah. Well, immediately after the death of George Floyd, Marla Kaplowitz, the CEO of the 4As, called together, from what I could tell, was just about every diverse leader in media and in the industry and agencies. And we all sat down to talk about, what could be done, what should be done, what was being done, so on and so forth. And what came out of that, or what was happening during that conversation, was just a lot of voicing of just the lack of support, and that had to be changed. But that seemed obvious, I think, to everyone, right? And so that was beginning to be tackled. I would say that was the inception of it. And then there was this thing that was not being discussed, which was the research and the measurement, and how do we have sustainable impact on the path forward. And so I brought this to the group's attention, and Marla, being the maven and maverick that she is, really wanted to have those conversations. And so we embarked on the path of many meetings, and we started to talk about, Bill, your work with Black Enterprise, and in the 60s with, rest his soul, Earl Graves Sr., one of my heroes, and what you did back then that was landmark research likened to this, or I should say maybe even the precursor to this. So it made sense to do, and we pressed forward and started acting.
Thanks, Charles. It was actually the 70s. Ian, the topic of diversity in advertising has been around for many, many years. Different now, what's the same? What have been the barriers to and the contributions to progress?
It's a great question. I know, like many of those on the phone, it does feel like this has been a conversation going on, my entire career, and I've been at it for now almost 3 decades, I'm afraid to say out loud. And sometimes it's easy to get discouraged because the conversations often feel very familiar. And I think particularly for the professionals of color community, it's wonderful in terms of what you alluded to. What's different, I think, is that there is, increased urgency, increased accountability, and it seems to have spread a little wider beyond the professional color community. So that is somewhat encouraging. And I think there's a greater recognition now of some of the structural aspects of it. I think there's been a lot of good, valiant sort of point solution efforts. Something flares up like George Floyd or fill in the blanks. Everyone rushes to do a bit of good at that moment in time, and that's all wonderful. But I think there's now, when you look back over history, I think there's a deeper understanding and a louder call for more structural, more sustained change. And I'm like Charles, I'm very involved in this conversation, and I think the professional color community is more assertive, I think, about the need for action, not just talk. So, we continue to plow ahead, as Charles and I always say. So, but I do see more people involved in the conversation and more commitment to action than just talk.
Action. I agree. Ashwini, corporations have discussed diversity and inclusion forever. What's changed now? What stayed the same? What needs to happen next to do action and deliver manageable change?
I'm going to build on what both Charles and Ian mentioned. There has been a lot of talk. I think we have all heard it forever. I think what has changed is the pressure from ground up. The younger people, they are watching us not do anything and are wondering why we keep blabbering on about it if we don't intend to do anything about it. I built a company ground up. We were 2 people. We got to 800 people. The attitudinal difference between just talk versus what's the big deal, let's just get on with it, is so pronounced now that it's almost it'll be, you know, shame on us grown-ups if we don't do something about it. And I think what has changed is I have a high schooler. My son is in high school, and he just, you know, every time I'm like, oh, diversity, he's like, what are you talking about? We're already there. So what is it that's stopping you from doing it at work? And I have no answer to that. I don't know what's stopping us, right? I think for women in workforce, it's kind of similar. It's like, what's the big deal? Like, come on. And I feel one of the big changes is technology. It's become the big equalizer. Anyone who can code, man, woman, gay, lesbian, trans, anyone who can code is welcome to the party. And suddenly there are no barriers anymore. And I think there are many such micro changes that are adding up to become something much bigger. And truly, shame on us if we don't take advantage of it. I think George Floyd's murder should have never happened, but it absolutely is a very clear call for all of us to say, this should have never happened, it cannot happen again. And publicly say it, actively acknowledge it, and really work towards it. And I think the groundswell support is what has changed now. And for all the ills of social media, the positive of social media is, you know, you can now speak up and challenge and get change done. And I kind of see this consistently within companies, within society, within communities, just within our own family. And I'm hoping that we keep building on that.
You know, that's so profound. It's absolutely true. It's a very hopeful sign that we're actually going to be able to make real progress now. And we'll have to applaud the young people for helping us finally get there. Charles, what results are marketers seeing when they deploy the universal inclusion process?
Yeah, so I guess without disclosing names, other than with Yin, because she's here and she can certainly chime in, suffice to say that we've seen clients literally sell out of inventory. We've seen, you know, we've been crushing it in comparison to some of the major vendors, ad tech vendors in the industry. What I'm finding is that when you implement these better data and processes, it does get easier, and we haven't figured out exactly why yet, which is what this is all about, but I believe it has to do with just speaking to people the way they like to be spoken to, treating people the way they like to be treated, right? Not the golden rule, but the platinum rule, wherever I learned that from. I think it was Procter and Gamble, but certainly, and then frankly, you know, when it comes to connected TV and over the top and online video, which is where we've been strongest, that is where we've seen kind of the more exponential results. And I'm not really sure because that communicates more powerfully or not, but I think we're going to find that out too.
Yeah. Yin, what do you think the role of the market research discipline is in helping progress this discussion from talk to action?
You know, I don't think I could stress just how critical the importance of the discipline is. And I'm not just saying that because we're presenting to the MRC. I mean, I started most of my career with various CPG clients, and data, you know, survey data in the beginning, but now increasingly first, second, and third party data is the bedrock of decision making. It really is, especially when you don't have that closed loop retail performance. You're really relying on research to guide your strategy, your decisioning, all the way through the value chain. And I honestly, it was very late in my career when I realized that market, and sounds obvious to you guys, market research can have its own bias. I think our sponsor spoke eloquently about that earlier. And the bias can be positive, it can be negative, it can start from sample to questionnaire design to experimental design. And marketers, we're only as good in some ways as the data that the market research profession provides us. And frankly, many of us, myself included, though I consider myself relatively quantitative, I'm not a market research professional, right? I'm really relying on your expertise to eliminate as much bias, to be as inclusive as possible, because frankly, I'll never know. I'll see the report and I'll trust you and I'll trust your research vendors. And so as a marketer and as a professional of color, the more the profession can do to really take an active stance on, is this research as unbiased as possible? Is it as inclusive as possible? Am I really taking the extra effort? And I learned the most, frankly, at Campbell Soup, because our head of research was very progressive on this topic. I mean, from the very basic things, like he insisted on oversampling on every research project we did, whether it was required or not. Marketers would come back to him and say, I don't want to spend the extra fill in the blank, because it's not pertinent to my project. And he's like, if you do research at a Campbell Soup company, it will be representative. Otherwise, you don't get a research project. Please leave my office. And it was just, and I didn't realize that was a choice until I met him. And so I learned a lot from him and I'm grateful for him. So I encourage everyone on the MRC to just be as staunch a leader as my friend Chuck Miller.
Yeah, I echo that. Yeah, and thank you. All my colleagues who are on this webinar right now, these are some of the smartest people in market research, and they're connected collectively to every major advertiser. And I hope that bringing in those advertisers and bringing in the research skills and the tools that these people have developed, including the sponsor today, these new tools are going to be a very important part of our success here, I believe. Ashwini, you heard Charles mentioning, and it gave me a warm feeling inside when he did my work with Black Enterprise years ago. Do you have any recommendations around how new publishers can enter the ecosystem?
That's a great question. I think it's not because of lack of trying. It's for the advertisers and agencies to actively seek out and include publishers that have not been given the time of day to showcase what they bring to the table. Some of the work that Reset Digital is doing in terms of identifying supply or publishers and making it available within your programmatic supply chain is fantastic. Something that we can all sort of do and help is take away some of the very stringent performance or CPM or CPC or all these metrics work if you have had time to sort of showcase and perform, or at least deliver something over a period of 6 to 9 months. But without getting that time under your belt, it's impossible to really be able to match or deliver or what have you. And so at the forays, while I was at Amnet, while I was at Dentsu, even before that, the effort has always been to bring in new publishers, give them, understand clearly what it is that they offer, because most of the publishers really bring good local inventory, supply, audience engagement, what have you, and give them at least 6 months of time to sort of demonstrate what they have. Once they're in the system for about 6 months, it's okay to then go back to some sort of performance metrics, if you will. And so I've not only encouraged, but I would actively ask every marketer and agency to seek out minority-owned, women-owned publishers who do not have the money to, go submit for audits or whatever else. Fund their audits, make their audits free, like get them into the system. And once that is done, then over a period of time, you can easily start measuring performance or lack thereof. Marla and I have been saying this for a long time about normalizing inclusion and forcing people to justify exclusion, not the other way around. So don't set up a 5% budget for minority. Instead of that, make it part of the supply, and then have someone explain why that's not part of it, because that's the only way it's really going to move. Otherwise, we can, 5 years from now, we'll have a very similar panel about, oh, why is there no change? Because there's no money behind it. That's why there's no change. And so put money behind it is the main. I think that's how publishers get into the system and into the mix more and more.
So important. And I must say the Reset Digital under Charles's leadership is actually carrying out what you just proclaimed. There's one major company that's doing something about it and following your prescription there. Charles, what kind of adoption are you seeing?
Well, I guess publicly I can say it because Mark Pritchard has personally gone on stage and talked about his work with us, and so has Dentsu. So we're pretty excited about those partnerships. I won't steal any of our future thunder, but I think this is, for multiple reasons, the most exciting time in my business career. One, it's the first time ever as a Black man it's actually been good to be a Black guy in business, and there, I call it the chocolate a la mode effect. And so I love being in the room because there's some goodness from that. But from a publisher's perspective, even the large publishers like Crackle are willing to work with Reset and allow big spenders like Procter and Gamble and others to potentially subsidize folks like, the Quintessential Gentleman that are very small, or, what's another site, Black Doctor, or mylifestyle.us, which is a Latina site. And these are publishers that were either not ad enabled or weren't getting their fair share or had limitations. And I can go on and on about the number of publishers that we are not just helping to bring to measurement, but actually just ad enabling them. They didn't have the resources because what would they do? They'd publish a magazine quarterly and they would do some events to sustain their passions, and that's how they lived. But now it's folks like Dentsu and Mark Pritchard and Milk and Yin and Ashwini all getting together, around this cause, and AWS and Horizon Media and Unilever speaking internationally. So quite frankly, it is the most exciting time in my career, and that's I'm not saying that lightly.
Panelists, I have more questions, and I see, based on the time, that if we want to give the audience some chance to ask you questions, I should put aside my prepared questions and open it up right now. Do you agree?
Yep.
Ian,
Yes.
Are you on board with that too?
Yes, that's fine. So,
Okay. Kim, have you gotten any questions in the chat that you would want us to try to address?
Yeah, so we have one from Carol Haney. Hi, Carol. She would like to know, how much do you think it is important that the message is as authentic as possible, as much as inclusion of minorities in advertising to help impact change?
Anyone want to take that one?
Sure, I'm happy to. I've had this conversation with many marketers, so I will say there are things that are going to be important to the marketer, as we all know, that may preclude them from having, a certain typecast within an environment. But I think, you have to start with the humanity first, which I think is, what RMT and Reset Digital and Neuroprogrammatic bring to the table. And then you have to measure like what is legitimate for authenticity and empathy to that audience. So these are layers of, start with humanity first, then maybe you're layering on the demography. And then there's the, is this for me or not for me element of the research that has to create a feedback loop to inform your creative, which quite frankly has not been done, and especially not adapted until now in neuroprogrammatic on how do you deploy that creative in the wild programmatically, right? People weren't even really designing creative for dynamic creative optimization the way they probably should have in the first place. Now you're adding a layer to that. But the people that are doing it are really doing really well when they do.
Thank you. Kim, you have another question or two?
That was the question that came in, but I think I would like to understand what impact the COVID pandemic has maybe had on either moving these initiatives forward. Having just read some information about how the changes to working in an office has impacted society. What's the role that this crazy pandemic we've lived through has now had?
I think, one of the most written about and pronounced impact has been women leaving the workforce and not getting kicked out, but leaving as a choice because of family and everything else. Like we have all lived through. I am part of a small group that not gives time, but essentially offers free time to any woman who's wanting to either rebuild resume, prepare for interview. It's so, and I empathize with all. It's so easy for people to lose confidence after 3 to 6 months saying, oh no, I may have been the CMO of the largest brand ever, but am I good enough? It's like, what are you talking about? Of course you're good enough. So let's help spread the word. So that while that has been pronounced, I think the fact that it's reported, now we know what we can sort of measure against and work towards, like undoing that change. There are many other things about, working from home, parents, no parents, I'm sure Charles and Ian have similar examples as well, or different examples.
Yeah, I think obviously it has been very disruptive, and I think it's been more positive for some people and less positive for others. I think the one thing we sort of try to keep an eye on is in terms of like team cohesion and the lack of a physical environment. If you're already working hard to feel included, for whatever your reason is, you may be from a different background, you're new to the company, you're new to the industry. I guess as leaders, we all just have to take that extra effort to make sure everyone is as included as possible and still feels like their voice is heard. And if there were already structural barriers or government or company barriers to professionals of color feeling that way, COVID may exacerbate those. So I think, Ashwini said it well earlier, how do you make inclusion the norm, not just in media and marketing, but in talent practices, in compensation, in strategy setting. And I look forward to the day where we don't have to talk about it anymore. And when you make a balanced scorecard between financial, operational, strategic, and executional, that inclusion is just woven through the whole scorecard. And hopefully it will happen before I retire, because I have been waiting a long time. I may never retire at this point. So.
Yeah, I guess to bat last, I will just say, I've heard a lot of kind of stories around, to Ashwini's point, people kind of leaving the workplace, women and, African American, Latino, but I think there is an air of hope. And I think, the beauty of what's been happening because of, what the 4As is doing and what other associations have been trying to do, or at least bring to the forefront, the publishers themselves, the people that work for those publishers and people in large corporations are feeling empowered, even if it's to start their own thing, to leave. I talked to a woman yesterday that left KPMG, that's doing her own thing to help diverse communities raise capital for their startups, and she's doing an amazing job. And so I think the world is changing, and it's fun to watch, and we just have to, life is emergent, and we just embrace it. And one of the things that we've done personally at Reset is we have an on-staff life coach, and talk about drinking your own Kool-Aid when it comes to neurocognitive. Like, people are talking to that life coach, and we run a risk. We lost an employee that said, this isn't what I want to do with my life, and now she's off becoming a teacher and doing teaching, And, you know, that hurt, but at the same time, we were proud of ourselves and her for making that decision for herself. So, you know, we're really embracing what's happening here.
Thank you. I see there's one more question and we have about 1 more minute. Let me read it. Has anyone studied the reactions to inclusive ads among people who are anti-minorities? Do they become more or even less accepting of others?
I'll take a crack at that and just say from a cognitive standpoint, where you put your attention is where you get your results. And I'm not really putting a lot of attention into, you know, what I would call inhibitory scenarios. So we're focusing on a lot of excitatory, what's going to get the best outcome for the greatest appeal and what's going to drive short and long-term cash flow. So, you know, there may be, you know, that possibility, but it's not a place where we put much attention, quite frankly.
I'd like to add that when I think about that non-ad ad that we looked at, the talk, what it does, I would hope, is if you're a racist watching it, make you feel, well, I'm a parent too, and I can understand this. I can relate to this. I can put myself in that mother's shoes. If we can achieve that, then we can really knock down all defenses.
Yeah. I agree. I would just like to add to that about, you know, it takes a village to make these changes. And it's on all of us to actively, categorically state where we want to get to, instead of just hoping that people get the message or whatever else. To what Charles mentioned, I think it's just, maybe it's time to just develop a herd immunity against all the ills that have plagued us and actively state that this is where we want to go. And so over a period of time, people are going to move in that direction.
Amen.
So, yeah.
I want to thank the panelists, and Kim probably is about to tell us that we're done anyway.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you all so much. We do have a networking event right after this. If everybody has, I saw a few more questions come in that were really great. If everybody would like to continue the conversation in more of an interactive forum, we'd love to see you there. Ashwini, Ian, Charles, Bill, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. And I'll see you all in the other room.
Thank you. Bye.